Hello everyone and welcome back to the Overseers. My name's Proelios and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Nightwing, and we are nearly at the tail end of the regular season matches of the Overwatch League this year, and it's definitely been a season of new learnings, new beginnings, new endings, new everythings with the arrival of Overwatch 2, which we finally got to play last week, and which is also partly the reason why we didn't have an episode to record, because we were just like, we have to get our hands on the game and play it as much as we can. And before we talk about the league at all, we just like to share our brief thoughts on like our first impressions of the game and how it feels to play. So Nightwing, can you just share a brief like initial impression of Overwatch 2?
I think there's definitely something to be said about the value that Overwatch 2 provides to the average player, just because you do have more of a hand in every fight. You don't have to try and coordinate as much, and you're not really locked into hero picks as harshly as you were in Overwatch 1, where some picks would just be an instant hard throw. Uh, so I think in that sense, Overwatch 2 is quite good. I think a little bit of the excitement is gone, and it's a little bit harder to turn around a 4v5 once you've sort of lost a fight. And stuff like that does make it feel like really you're just relying on your damage players all the time or your tank player, since tank is an incredibly strong role now to sort of carry you. So I think there's this sort of balance of power that maybe is not checked very well on Overwatch 2, which can feel a bit odd at times. That said, the game is definitely in flux and they are still trying to balance it out. So, uh, as a holistic change, I think there are definitely a lot of uh, sort of minor annoyances and major annoyances, looking at U2CP, that have been removed from the game. So, I think overall, Overwatch 2 is probably a good step in the right direction. But personally, I've found that I've been sort of losing my competitive spirit. But maybe that's just my personal experience. There's something about Overwatch 2 that isn't clicking for me yet. Maybe it will in the future once more changes are made to the game. But right now, I'm not completely on board. But I am liking what I'm seeing from Blizzard, and they are hopefully taking a more active approach to managing the game this time.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and I think right now the key for Blizzard to keep getting more and more players is just frequent content updates and communication with the community and listening to feedback. Because I think like the Overwatch 1 got stale for so long, even for me, that I was just excited to have just anything related to Overwatch that was new to play. I wasn't like a big fan of the 5v5 format that Overwatch 2 has to offer, and like to be honest, I don't think I'll ever like think that it's better than 6v6 just because I like the depth that 6v6 brought with it. But yeah, without going into it like further, right now at this point I think the game is quite fun to play. As far as I can see, it's less of a game of team compositions and more of a game of win conditions. Like no longer will you think that, oh, I need to play these heroes together in order to win. You'll more so be thinking, oh, I need to shut this player down to win, or I need to control this part of the map to win, or I need this ultimate combo to win. So like I like the fact that there are multiple ways to approach a single problem, because in general there is like naturally there are less shields to operate against. There are two less players on the field, so that like reduces the options to play like down to a pool where you can pick one of like let's say a finite number of win conditions, if that makes sense. And I think that's quite good, like fun for me as someone who likes to problem solve. But I don't know how other players think about it, so be sure to comment down below whether you like the new playstyle requirements that come with Overwatch 2, and like how you feel that this has changed your approach to the game in any way, if at all. So yeah, that being said, we will talk about this maybe later on in a separate video. But for now, let's move on to talk about the league. And yeah, let's like firstly address the Calling All Heroes initiative that the Overwatch League announced, uh, which is essentially um, a path to pro for like underrepresented genders, you can say. So, like for a long time, naturally the Overwatch community hasn't been able to like be a safe space for a lot of underrepresented genders, and like we understand that the place hasn't been entirely amicable and accepting of them. So it's really nice that something's been done on such a large scale to encourage like people who fall under these different categories and genders to um, like follow their dreams if at all they want to be part of esports, and like not feel any less like comfortable than like any of us. So I think it's a fantastic initiative. You can find the details on the Overwatch League website, and yeah, we just thought we should acknowledge that in this episode. Nightwing, any thoughts on the Calling All Heroes initiative?
Yeah, I think Overwatch has a really big like community regardless of your like gender. It's not just a male centric game, despite whatever the overwhelming amount of male presence in Overwatch League would have you believe. Um, so I think this is a good initiative, and it's sort of they've got their head in the right place. There have been like definitely other side projects within the Overwatch community to try and uh, increase representation of other genders. However, that's not been maybe quite as successful as I'm hoping this will be. You've got your stuff like Watchpoint Pride, etc., uh, where they've got different content creators as well as workshop, uh, like custom game mode makers, etc. They've got them just on board, but those things haven't been really that successful and haven't been able to reach quite as far within the sort of mainstream Overwatch community. So I'm hoping that with the Calling All Heroes initiative, we're able to bring that sort of inclusiveness into the competitive community, especially um, since the casual community is still fairly well represented, like here and there, but the competitive community isn't. So I think that it's high time that Blizzard did this. Obviously, they have also been falling a little bit behind, um, because if you look at like a competing esport such as Valorant, they've already got communities such as Galorant and some other sort of communities that are already doing this, and Riot has been trying to bring the limelight towards those sort of communities. So I think it's a good thing that Blizzard is trying to address this issue and just trying to make the acceptance side of Overwatch much more prevalent throughout. I know I've ranted a bit more, like much about this, but this is a really nice initiative that I think genuinely does help the health of the game and keeps it from being just a try hard, 5v5 shooter. Because they are obviously moving into a PvE experience as well. They want it to be a holistic experience, and getting in as many honest, good players from every side of the spectrum is a really good idea, I feel.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I know that competitive Overwatch is generally like marshy territory for any kind of like minority, uh, like be that in terms of religion, gender, whatever, and like not everyone online is friendly to everyone else. Like, may they know each other or not, but like since Overwatch and the idea behind Overwatch is also like global acknowledgement, representation, equality. I think that's like a perfect way to translate the values of the game to the values of the league and the values of the path to pro. So I think it's a step in the right direction, and I hope it really works out well. All right, then let's move on and talk about the Countdown Cup qualifiers. Um, we are not going to talk about any games in particular because right now we just want to mention like the overall team statuses for the end of season playoffs. So as far as we know, in the NE region, the top five teams that have qualified directly for the playoffs are the Dallas Fuel, the Gladiators, the Shock, the Outlaws, and Atlanta Reign. So they have clinched their particular playoff spots. And honestly, it's been a blast watching all of these teams play. I think they none of these teams falls in kind of the boring category, like which are for us just teams that we don't really like watching, like playing on the stage either because they don't make enough plays or they don't have big enough personalities on the team, like whatever it is, you know. But all five of these teams are really good. They have had their moments throughout the season, and yeah, it's gonna be fun to see which one of them rises up above the rest, and maybe even probably even grabs the championship this year. Uh, what do you think about like the five teams that have qualified, and do you think any other team should have been there instead of any of the top five teams, Nightwing?
I think I would definitely, obviously, give it to the Dallas Fuel and the Gladiators without, second thought. Just because obviously Gladiators have won two tournaments, Dallas have won one, and they might even win the Countdown Cup, for all we know. And so I think that's pretty fair. I think Shock also makes sense despite them failing recently, just because the regular season record up until extremely recently was basically undefeated. So I think that's also decently well learned from them. They've like made it to the finals many times. I think probably the most interesting team is probably the Houston Outlaws, to be honest. Uh, I think even the Atlanta Reign isn't really, that shocking. They have been like a pretty decent team. I think the Outlaws have been sort of up and down, and I'm still not super convinced about players like Doge on their roster. Um, they have mostly tried to phase him out after giving him a little bit of a uh, trial to try and get his feet wet in the league. However, that doesn't seem to work very well for him. So now they've put Dante back in, and I think this is a team that is in sort of a weird spot where sometimes you feel like they don't really have the caliber to really be a top team, but then they also just end up beating the Dallas Fuel, um, who were previously doing really well and were one of the best teams in the league, and they currently still are. So I think the Outlaws are sort of a wild card here, but they've also, clinched that spot. So uh, they're trying to make a statement here, pretty much that they are here to stay. They've got the skills that are required to take it, toe to toe with all the other behemoths of the league. So I think pretty much every team has deserved sort of getting into this top five. Um, but there are definitely some other teams that I feel like wasted their potential a little bit. Um, but that's something they'll have to suffer for uh, in obviously the play-ins and whatever matches they've got left, try and get into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like a close call among at least the top three slots, which would be the Fuel, the Shock, and the Gladiators. The Rain and the Outlaws are in bit of murky territory because there are other teams like, for example, the Toronto Defiant or the London Spitfire that I could have seen getting those, fourth and fifth seeds. But naturally, at the moment, the Outlaws and the Rain are, they are more skilled than the rest, and that's why they are on top. So let's talk about some of the teams that are now like officially disqualified from the playoffs and the play-ins. From the NA region, which are the Vancouver Titans, the New York Excelsior, and the Paris Eternal. And I don't think it comes as a shock to anyone that it's these three teams because they have been, really big letdowns overall. They have not been playing like even close to the level of some of the upper tier teams, and like it they sometimes have just really embarrassing showings. So yeah, I mean it makes sense that they haven't qualified even for the play-ins, but I do hope they come back stronger next year and give us a more competitive, I guess lower tier if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah, I think the Vancouver Titans were starting to really show a lot of promise. I did like that the team did seem to turn around and actually become, not just a continuous stream of entertainment robbery once DP came in. And I think the retooling of the roster and them just resetting their mindset was something that I can actually appreciate. Um, I will say that I am disappointed in the NYXL because, you know, uh, at the beginning of the season, they didn't look that bad, but the gap just kept getting wider and wider to the point where you would just automatically almost assume that the NYXL would lose like every match that you saw them in, which I think is a crying shame because they've got some really good players, especially Yaki on their roster. Flora also looked really promising last year, but then just this year did not really show up at all. It felt like this team was consistently disappointing, and that was really surprising considering Overwatch 2 does have more of that mechanical inclination, uh, and even so, they were not able to really get anything done. Um, Despite them having some mechanically talented players. So I think that's just a bit weird from the NYXL. They had that weird ordeal with signing tons and tons of flex support players for absolutely no reason. So I think the management and the coaching needs to be looked at, and they probably need to find honestly a better tank as well going into next season. I feel. Uh, as for the Paris Eternal, I don't really have any comments. I think they've just played horribly. Uh, I would probably just, you know, burn it all down and go for a retool, which they will as, the Las Vegas Eternal or whatever name they decide to go with after this season.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame that, these teams weren't able to, do the disco a little bit more in the league. But yeah, I think let's move on and talk about the APAC region as well. We have our top three teams in the Seoul Dynasty, the Shanghai Dragons, and the Philadelphia Fusion. Um, I'm honestly not at all surprised about the Dynasty and the Dragons because they have consistently been the top teams in APAC. But it's quite funny that the Fusion have qualified as well because it feels like they just barely scraped through. They've been the most inconsistent team this season. Like the it this is how it goes for them, right? Like they start off playing every single stage or every single month. Um, at like a really high level or a really low level, and they somehow end that stage on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's just the most annoying thing as an analyst, and I'm sure even as a Philly Fusion fan to watch, because you can never predict how well this team is going to play. Because one week they're losing to the Valiant, and the next week they're beating the Seoul Dynasty or taking them to Map 5. It's just insane. So, like, I am a bit surprised that the Fusion are here. I do think they've still had some of the highest peaks in the APAC region, but there are teams, for example, even like the Guangzhou Charge, that have as of late exhibited some really solid gameplay that I would put above the Philadelphia Fusion. Yeah, you've also got teams like the Hangzhou Spark, for example, or the Chengdu Hunters, whom they have played close multiple times. So yeah, I mean, it's just that the Fusion have won points when it has mattered, and that's why they're in the third seed. But I wouldn't be surprised if they, just like mess up early on in the playoffs and, just like drop off in the first two games or so.
I think what's hilarious is that both the Toronto Defiant and the Philly Fusion are mathematically mid. Like they have lost exactly the number of matches. I mean, the number of maps that they've won and the maps that they've lost. Um, s- and that just sort of goes to show what I think of both of those teams. Honestly, is sometimes they look good, sometimes they look terrible, and you can't really figure out why. The Philly Fusion is even more confusing than the Toronto Defiant. Um, and I think honestly, just because of their performances earlier in the season, especially uh, with a lot of great performances coming out from MN3 and Zest, is why the Philly Fusion have got to this spot. Otherwise, you could be easily seeing some other teams coming in and taking this spot. Hangzhou have done them a favor and become bad suddenly, uh, or just become worse and worse over time. So I guess, congrats to Philly, but they're going to have to work really hard if they want to actually stand any chance at a sort of global level once both the regions are combined. And I think that's something the Philly Fusion unfortunately won't be able to do. The Seoul Dynasty, though, has been doing absolutely like fantastic all through the season. Shanghai Dragons very good as well. So no real complaints there. Sadly, the rest of APAC is sort of a disappointment. Guangzhou has been sort of improving recently, becoming Chengdu Light, uh, stealing players from the former Chengdu roster. So I mean, good on them, but overall, the APAC region has mostly just been the Dynasty and Dragons dominating.
Yeah, and like the one team that is definitely not going to be playing in the playoffs from APAC are the LA Valiant. And all things said and done, I don't think the Valiant had that bad of a season. Um, like it's just unfortunate that they weren't able to rack up enough wins to even try for the play-ins. But I do think that they were quite close to getting in. It's just that they were a little too inconsistent. Although they did have some really entertaining and impressive showings overall, because they did have some great pieces. They had Dia and Easyhan, who were some of the most like popular players from China coming in on the DPS lineup. They did bring in Marvel as well, who had a pretty interesting start to the season, showing off some really good skills on the Doom Fist, like already being known and famous for his Sigma play, and just being a formidable main tank in general. And they even had like some really good support players. So right now they have Molly and Lengsa who have played together like for a really long time. Whether it be with Team Chaser or the Chengdu Hunters. So they did have some great pieces, but it's just that they had a lot of players coming in and leaving. They had some coaching staff changes as well, and they just weren't able to get the wins when they mattered. And I don't think they even made it to a single like tournament playoff. So just unfortunate for them, but I think if they continue in this direction, they should be able to try for play-ins next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Valiant sadly continues to be a meme. Uh, the direction the memes go in sort of keep changing. Uh, the whole no hill smoking his pack thing, though this year was hilarious. The weird, no hill season hashtag went on as people kept believing in no hill's abilities, but eventually it just did not really come into fruition. Um, there was the whole thing about them not being able to afford players properly either, the whole, PayPal ordeal. It's just really funny that the Valiant just continues to be funny year after year, ever since season one with the whole in and out agilities thing. So, if nothing else, I'm sure Tezonde is extremely entertained by this team. Sadly, on a competitive level, they haven't really been able to show their stuff that well. I think some of their pieces were able to show some individuality and make some unique plays here and there. But as the season has gone on, I think everyone in APAC has pretty much figured them out, and that's why the Valiant are in the end they're just very ineffective, and that clearly shows with them being unable to play in the playoffs anymore. So unlucky for them, but also I would say it's pretty well deserved. I don't think what is it, Lingan Esports is really managing them very well. Neither is the coaching staff. They all seem to be very all over the place. The players also, I'll be honest, are mid at best. They're not really great. Um, there are only a few players that were generally good from the beginning of the roster, and them trying to make changes here and there didn't really work out very well either. They signed way too many DPS players, which shockingly, you don't need five DPS players on a roster if you can't afford to get a tank. Um, I think this organization is just extremely mismanaged and has been for multiple years now. So it's not really surprising that they're getting the results that they deserve.
Yeah, I mean it's just unfortunate. Like I really hope that the Valiant management somehow correct this like series of errors that they continue to make, because I think that they really messed it up this season because they had some really good pieces, but then for some reason they had to go off and sign players like Hacker, for example, like which made no sense because the guy didn't even get a single like shred of play time. I believe has he even played this season? Like even if he played, it might have been like one map or so. I don't really remember, but yeah, like they need to be more sensible about how they're spending the money and figure out how much they exactly want to spend because they need to want to actually win stuff. Yeah, like last year was a meme. This year it was close to being a meme, but because they had some good pieces, it didn't end up being one. So yeah, just all the best to the Valiant, and we'll see what happens. And just the final topic of this video is going to be about the MVP for 2022. And there were 10 players in discussion this year. They were Shu, Kevster, Proper, Hanbin, Kai, Hardy, Zest, Lip, Smurf, and Prophet. Um, and although neither Nightwing nor I like have been able to vote for the MVP, like because we just forgot, and the voting window has closed as of I think 24 hours ago. We do want to talk about who we think are the most deserving candidates out of these 10, because I can tell you right now the voting is going to be quite even because a lot of these players either have a huge fan base or they've got like a lot of highlights to show for themselves in the league, or they are just like known to be like god tier players. So Nightwing, what about you? Who do you think deserves the title of MVP?
Okay, so from an objective view, I would say there's no way you vote for anyone but Hanbin, to be honest. Maybe I can see an argument for Profit. In my heart of hearts, as a Shock fan and as someone who absolutely loved his gameplay, even before the season started, uh, I want to say Proper, but sadly the timing is extremely poor considering that has his eye issues and the Shock is finally beginning to lose in the regular season right before the voting closes. Um, so I think because of that, you kind of have to take all of that in mind and see that players like Hanbin have been consistently performing. Profit has always been helping his team reach literally the top of APAC for the entire season. So I think those are the players that I would look at. The other players are on teams that are not really successful enough, I feel, to deserve the MVP vote just because uh, even if a player is carrying a particular team to some degree, if the team is not actually successful, then how valuable really is that carry, right? um, and that's something that we've mostly looked at every year, apart from maybe uh, Leave, who was on Chengdu, and Chengdu didn't do extremely well, but they were good enough to at least be considered in contention just because of how hard the carry from Leave was. That said, I think this year you would probably look at players that are actually from a fairly successful team. Um, Obviously, the impact that a player has in Overwatch 2 has increased compared to Overwatch 1 just because two players have been removed from the lobby. Um, so I think that this year you will see that players who honestly did make the most difference on the field will hopefully see their hard work rewarded.
Yeah, I really agree with all of that. Like, I think Proper as well, just as someone who likes Shock as well, I think Proper is definitely in the discussion and probably will just win it because of how popular the team is and some of the plays that he's made this season. From an objective view, if I look at it, um, I can probably see two names being up there. The first one, like you said, Nightwing being Hanbin, because like although he has shared playtime with Fearless, he has been like probably the best player on the Dallas field this year. He definitely was one of the best tank players coming into the league this season overall, and he has just proven that he's unbeatable on the off-rank roles. Like he can play the best Zarya ever, the best Junker Queen ever, a really good Sigma, probably the best Diva as well. Although he hasn't played a lot of Diva. So all in all, his off-tank level is just off the charts, and he has been the carry for the team on many occasions. So I think he is truly deserving of the MVP award. And another player that I think is probably at the same level is Smurf. Because even though, like, I don't think Smurf has had the biggest highlights this season, he has had like some really good, like, showy performances, you can say. But all in all, I think he's been a really good rock for this whole dynasty. Because, like, how many teams do you know which have a solo tank player who can actually flex to every single tank to a good enough level to compete with any team? I don't think any team has that, and Smurf has proven that he is mechanically skilled, understands the game, understands his role within every single composition, and can flex to any hero without actually complaining. Like, he doesn't need a second tank player to sub in for him. He doesn't need a DPS player to play the Junker Queen for him, like the Valiant did. He can just play every single hero, and I like every time I've seen his POV, he is doing something that he should be doing. Like, I can, of course, I'll be able to go deeper once I get a replay viewer, but I've never ever seen him making any crucial mistakes. So, which is like something you can rarely say about a player. And I think that kind of flexibility, even playmaking potential, because he did have some incredible games on the Winston. Just like last stage, no, not last stage, actually, in week one of the Countdown Cup qualifiers, I believe. He had an insane game, like against, I believe, the Valiant. And it's just hard for me to see a more flexible tank player right now in the league. So Smurf and Hanbin are probably my two favorite picks. I don't know which one I would go for. The fans would probably say Hanbin, but I think Smurf has been a silent carry for his team all along. Naturally, that doesn't. I don't mean to diminish the efforts of more popular choices, of course, like Proper, Kevster, and Prophet, because all of them are really amazing players as well. But I think if you had to just look at the contribution and value is what the MVP award is for. I think it's these two players. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the MVP. So any final thoughts about any of the stuff that we've discussed, Nightwing, or should we close off the episode?
Yeah, so just going back to the Valiant thing, um, since by the way, Stats Lab is now open finally at the end of the season.
Oh right.
So enjoy playing fantasy for about 3 days or so while you can, because apparently it only takes 1 year to get Stats Lab working for an already established system.
Hey, that's
But
as long as it takes to make
yeah,
a mythic skin in Overwatch too.
yeah, apparently, yeah, a skin which takes 1 year to make as well, which is very sensible. Um, Yeah, so I went through the stats lab. I just wanted to make sure that Hacker did actually see playtime, and he has not. Every other player on the Valiant has played, but Hacker has exactly 0 seconds of playtime. So, if you want to see which of your, like, which players on your favorite team were the most useless or were just, secretly money laundering schemes, uh, you know the all their salary being shoveled into Los Pollos Hermanos, for example, then you can have a look at the stats lab now for a few days before again the season changes, and then we probably end up losing the stats lab again or something like that. So yeah, that was a very useful investment by the LA Valiant to sign Hacker along with four other DPS players. Um, Hopefully we'll see better management from them next year onwards.
Yeah, I actually can't believe I forgot the stats lab topic, because like it's been a really frustrating thing for me because I love playing fantasy Overwatch, and like it I was really hyped going into this year because hey, it's Overwatch 2, it's the first year of a new way to approach fantasy Overwatch, right? And I'd like joined all of these leagues. I was looking forward to playing daily fantasy on a few different platforms, and it all just fell apart because then I'm on Discords on all of these different platforms, chatting with the developers or just like regular players, and the developers keep posting all these updates like, hey, sorry guys, stats lab hasn't updated yet, but we are gonna like manually change the costs of all of these players and estimate the stats based on screenshots and just all kinds of workarounds just to make up for the lack of like communication from the league and specifically the Stats Lab team. It's a big disappointment because I don't think like Stats Lab has always been a problem for Overwatch League because during the first few weeks we rarely ever get regular stats in any season. But at least back when Captain Planet was the head honcho, he used to communicate to us that hey guys, it's gonna take so long. Apologies. There was no communication like that this year. We were just left in the dark. The API was not updated, and yeah, there was just no communication, which sucks. Um, I understand it's a new game. I know it's going to be there's going to be different stats that are being stored, but like it would be nice to know if you are like intentionally not updating the stats on the API or you are having trouble porting the data from Overwatch 1 to 2. At least something to like help us understand what's gone wrong. So I hope that doesn't happen next year. If I had to like place a bet on something, I think the league might be making their own owl fantasy, but we will have to see. And yeah, that's the end of my rant. So yeah, that's. I don't think we have anything more to cover in this episode. So if you guys like our content, don't forget to share it around. We are hoping to reach more players, more fans in this Overwatch 2 era. So yeah, any final words, Nightwing?
Yeah, I just want Overwatch to be a fun experience, honestly. It feels like Overwatch 2 is trending in the right direction, but it's not quite there. Um, I hope that, going forward, Blizzard actually finishes the game. Currently, just feels very incomplete, to be honest. Many features don't work properly, uh, much to my annoyance and also to the annoyance of many other people. Uh, the launch was not amazing. They didn't deal with the DDoS very well. So Blizzard does have an opportunity to still try and rectify this, um, and to make thoughtful and considerate balance changes to add features that the game requires to help promote Overwatch League better. Currently, they're not really using that opportunity very well, but that's something that they can do, and both for the health of the game and the health of the league. So I think there is definitely a lot to be positive about. There have been some extremely good additions to Overwatch 2. There have been some really exciting things going on in the league as well. And, playoffs will start before you know it. And you'll be seeing the grand finals very, very, very soon as well. So it's still a good time to be an Overwatch fan. You've finally gotten content you've been waiting for an almost infinite number of years. So, enjoy the new hype, but still be critical of Blizzard and uh, make sure that they do right by the community, I guess.
Yeah, very well said. I think accountability is going to be a really big factor in determining like how well Overwatch 2 is received, even by new players at this point. So yeah, all the best to Blizzard, all the best to all of you and your grinds and your placements. We will see you next week, where we will finally be on the other side of the regular season matches. We have a final few boring matches left in any basically inconsequential stuff, but yeah, we'll still get back uh, to you guys and talk to you about what's elapsed in the past week next week. So yeah, see you then, and we're gonna go play some Overwatch 2 now. Bye bye.